Welcome to Three Count Commentaries. This is your erstwhile host, MagMongoSlade. Today we'll be talking about Triple H's interview with The Athletic, specifically his portions of NXT. I'm going to be doing some reading. I'm not going to read the whole thing. That's entirely too long. But we will be reading and responding to relevant portions of the interview. Then we'll be getting into NXT from April the 19th, 2022. So get yourself a snack, a lunch, maybe a Hot Pocket or something, and get ready to punch right in because we're going to be here for a while. All right, so let's start with Triple H's interview with The Athletic, which was published on April the 18th, so the previous day. Now, it talks a lot about why WWE has decided to go towards college athletes. This was has been a very controversial opinion that Triple H and the WWE have decided to go into. So The Athletic says, quote, Levesque kept coming up to the idea of the original purpose of the Performance Center and developmental was to create a path into WWE. The NXT Golden Era from 2014 to 2019 thrived largely in part because it signed so many independent wrestlers. And that was indeed a problem. I'm going to be discussing this a little bit more in a minute. But The Athletic, to give a little color, it's clearly sort of on the side of that the NXT rebranding wasn't a good idea. So that's kind of where they're coming from with this, but they're posting Triple H's whole comments in context. So I don't see it as being biased as much as you could just tell the writer as he was interviewing Triple H, he had his own ideas, and Triple H kind of eschewed them a little bit. So here's what Triple H had to say on the concept of NXT thriving because of the independent wrestlers. He says, quote, it always bothered me, like, to get into the wrestling in the past, you almost got to be someone with nothing else going on or can't take no for an answer and dig and dig and dig. But that pool is so small, people trying to get into this business. As I met more people and you become savvy to the world of athletes, you realize the NFL is letting go 500 players a year. You look at that massive pool of incredible talents and athletes from all sports. If you take that pool and 10 or 5% have big personalities that would be good for your business, you're talking about a talent pool of 1,000 times bigger than we have right now. So he's looking at it and saying the NFL releases a lot of guys who are athletic. The NBA does the same thing. NHL, same thing. There's going to be people who are not going to make these teams. And they're athletes, professional athletes, people who go to the gym, they know how to stay in shape. They're professional to a degree, of course. And they're young because the NFL does not take 40-year-olds. All right. So increasing the talent pool is you have to actively go out and find them, as opposed to in the past where these guys had to find some way of getting somebody to train them. And, I understand what he's saying. You know, it is a passion business. Well, it was a passion business. You had to go through 100 barriers in order to get into wrestling in the past. The first was usually the grueling training, or some wrestler that you paid to train with taking off with your money. Another is maybe they put you through some kind of grueling boot camp with the intention of making you quit before they even taught you that wrestling was a work. You know, you're just taught calisthenics until you throw up and quit. But WWE is, of course, being forced to change the culture. Now, what is left out of this conversation usually is how WWE did sort of have those kinds of camps in the past. Their Deep South camp was more of the old school camp. The Jody Hamilton camps were pretty brutal. You know, we did a history of WWE developmental on this channel. Feel free to look at it if you didn't. And Deep South had a lot of complaints about the way that they trained talent. And it was mostly calisthenics. It wasn't teaching people how to work. It was basically trying to weed out the weak. And they said it was, quote, teaching cardio. But in reality, it was Jody Hamilton trying to weed out the weak. Because that's how wrestling used to happen. But if you also talk to anybody, Deep South Wrestling had the most complaints of abuse and all that sort of stuff than any other WWE developmental system. So they have to change it. You can't run a Vern Gagne training center nowadays because people will cry too much. Too many people will complain. too many people will drop out. You'll never get anything done. So now they have to change the way that they train talent, which means now they have to change the way that they recruit talent. They can't just take anybody anymore because the guy was tough enough to make it through the training. Now we have to actively go out and bring in people that we want or people that we think might have something, and then create a sort of, let's say, friendly recruiting center. And in doing so, everybody knows that the business is bunk now. Everybody knows it as, different from the past where nobody knew it was a work and you had to be trusted before you could even be trusted with that information. You had to be, regimented. It was like a fraternity. You had to be beat in. Now everybody knows it's a work. It's a job like every other job. They don't have to do that anymore, whether they can't. So that's, a good explanation of why they've chosen to go on with the independents, going with the way that they're recruiting now. Triple H continues. And this is because the Athletic says, quote, among the more recent NXT alumni, Finn Balor is 40 years old, Damian Priest is 39, and Tommaso Ciampa is 36. The idea of creating wrestlers in their early 20s is the goal. Levesque also knows they'll probably pass on someone who made it big elsewhere, but that's not a bad thing. So now Triple H is going to explain. He says, quote, are there going to be some we miss where they'll stay in the business, go find someone else to train them? Yeah, good for them. Probably sooner or later, we're going to see them and realize we were wrong and should hire them. And at some point, they'll want to be part of the biggest promotion in the world and come back here. So he's pretty sure that anybody we don't get who has a passion for wrestling, who's going to get trained somewhere else, that's fine. Eventually we will find them. Eventually they will come to us, or we'll come to them. And that kind of has been the case. WWE has all types of connections with different training facilities, from the Monster Factory to Reality of Wrestling to what Gangrel does to what Rogers does, and they will find these people eventually. When some of these people don't go to tryouts, or they can't make it to the tryout. They may have to make a phone call. It might have to be some nepotism, some backdoor wheeling and dealing. But WWE will eventually find the people that they want. And that's kind of what Triple H is saying. And, or the people will eventually find their way to WWE, either through the tryouts or through WWE reaching out to them, which I think is a fair assessment, if we're being honest. So, now we talk about NXT 2.0. The Athletic says, NXT brand change and TV move to Tuesday nights was seen by many as a mission of defeats after going head to head with AEW Dynamite, and it coincided with this youth movement. It also largely came while Levesque was out of the picture following his health scare, but he defended the move and said that the shift was always part of the plan. Now, we're going to talk about this because I saw a lot of people were very upset that Triple H didn't lambast NXT 2.0 because it's not his vision of what NXT is, as if, this guy wasn't running NXT from the beginning, which looked a lot more like it does now, back when it was really coming up. Very few independent guys, a lot of homegrown talents. That shift between, they said 2014 to 2019 was an aberration, even though it was 5 years. NXT existed before that, so, this is what Triple H had to say about the move to NXT 2.0. He says, quote, there was this point where it was on the WWE network, had this cult following we needed to get on television. How do we do that? We need more experience. We need to professionalize this a little bit to make the product where the fans want to see that. We got them to that place. The pandemic messed it up a little bit because it was right when we went to TV. We had to shift our focus, doing it in front of no people. It completely altered what we were doing. We couldn't recruit or train talent for almost 2 years, but the show stayed. Then we said, okay, let's reboot it and go back to what we originally were. Some of these people won't be ready for television, but we're going to put them on television. And we believe the audience is invested enough that the numbers might come down, but a core group of them will stay. And now you're creating fresh stars all the time. That's where we are now. The numbers have stabilized. Now, gotta point out something here from Triple H, where he says that we couldn't train or recruit for almost 2 years. That's not entirely true. They were still bringing in talent during the pandemic, but most of that talent that they brought in, I believe, was people that from Evolve. So Evolve was a for people who don't know, was a smaller professional wrestling promotion. It was bought by WWE, I think, a year or two, and it was sort of the NXT for NXT. It was an independent, but NXT talents would go there to pick up extra work. Evolve went out of business almost immediately when the pandemic struck because they couldn't run shows anymore. And a lot of those talents were the ones that made up the crop of talents that were brought into WWE during the pandemic, but they were still having tryouts and things like that during the pandemic. So that's not entirely true that they couldn't train, but it was limited. It was obviously limited. They couldn't have so many people in the building and all that sort of stuff. So there was some limitations, but it wasn't a complete cutoff. Now, that being said, Triple H says that he basically used the independent guys to get a television deal. That's what he says, they had this cult following, but they needed to get on television. Now, there's people out there who say NXT never should have been on TV, that it was a bad idea to even bring NXT to TV. But I remember the early days of, I don't want to say 2016 maybe, when there was a lot of people who wanted NXT on television. There was a lot of people who said, oh, it's only a matter of time before NXT comes on television. The time that they chose to bring NXT to television was, in accordance with AEW. But it was also in accordance with the hottest period of NXT. So it just so happened that these things just kind of coincided all at the same time. Now, Triple H, of course, is talking about investing in the future. So he's saying like, hey, look, the numbers are going to come down. And what we kind of left out is that the numbers had stagnated already anyway. NXT Black and Gold was not doing that well, especially on its own. The shows were a lot better, and the ratings probably were a little bit better. The early stage of them going head to head with Dynamite. And then as it progressed, NXT's ratings got worse. Now, I love to poke out the hypocrisy of other people. In this situation, there was a lot of people who stopped doing reviews of NXT. They said that the show was boring. They said that the show sucked. They said that, they didn't want to watch it. Nobody was interested. All this kind of stuff. And some of your favorite YouTubers stopped talking about NXT. They didn't care. All right. But then as soon as they blew NXT up, all of a sudden it was a big problem. And this is the worst possible thing that could ever have occurred. And that NXT was the best WWE product of all time and all that kind of stuff, right? All right. So now here's where I want to take some time to talk about why I agree that it was time to reboot NXT. Not just because I don't really care for the indie style that a lot of those guys were bringing, but I think NXT had peaked. And that was the major issue that I believe was the case when it comes to WWE, NXT, and AEW head to head. AEW was still fairly new, while NXT was something that had been around for, 7 or 8 years already at that point. People had already started to grumble about some of the decision making in NXT. The call-ups, the name changes, all this stuff that they still do that people are still complaining about. There was a lot of stuff that NXT did that the indie fans that they were catering to did not care for. And then AEW comes in and they didn't do any of that stuff. They didn't change anybody's name. They didn't do anything. They brought in, and it was not WWE. You also have to take into account that a lot of the whole Vince McMahon is taking over NXT crap came out around the same time Dynamite was loading up. That Vince and Bruce Pritchard was taking over the show. Funny how that kind of ceased once NXT 2.0 came. That once it blew up, all of a sudden, everything was Triple H. But they were saying it was Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard since 2019. But it wasn't. It was Triple H the whole time. He was just switching things up. He was changing things up a little bit. So, the 2-hour block also exposed a lot of the roster as being pretty thin. So that was another thing that was a problem, that nobody wants to talk about. But I think simply put, NXT peaked. And the one thing WWE does better than any other wrestling promotion, which is the reason why WWE is the biggest wrestling promotion on the planet Earth, is because they realize when something is no longer working, they're willing to put a bullet in it and start over. They're just willing to take the loss, screw it, start over. They've been doing this for years. Like when Vince decided, hey, you know what? Hogan, Piper, Savage, they're old. They're done. We're done with them. Pull a bullet in Hulkamania, it's over. And that kick-started WCW, because WCW never would have been as big as it was if Hogan and Savage and Piper and all those guys didn't go over there. But Vince looked at his numbers and said, it's not the 80s anymore. These guys aren't drawing like they did in 1987 or 1988 or 89. It's 1992 now, 1993. These guys are done. It's over. Get rid of them. And he did. He let Hulk Hogan go. He let Savage go. He let Piper go. And it went and made WCW bigger. And WWE struggled. They had to have the new generation era. Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels had to lean more on The Undertaker, Diesel, Razor Ramon. They had to create new stars. They had to start over. And then the new generation era peaked. And it was time for the Attitude Era. You got Stone Cold Steve Austin. You got The Rock. You got Triple H, who changed his character a little bit. Shawn changed his character a little bit. And you had something else. Then the Attitude Era peaked. Then it went to the Ruthless Aggression Era. And then that peaked. It's like, it's understanding that not just that the business is cyclical, but that the same thing is not going to be popular in perpetuity. You know, there's some, you can just bring this in totally in pretty much any business. You know, there's a reason why Lamborghinis are made pretty much every year or every other year, because no matter how good the car is going to peak in sales eventually. You know, albums eventually peaked. Artists eventually peak. Then they have to do something new. And WWE decided that NXT had peaked in 2021. The numbers had stagnated. A lot of contracts were starting to come up. Guys were jumping ship to AEW. They were on that firing spree that they were on through 2020 and 2021. It was time to do something different. And so to me, NXT 2.0 was a great decision. They had realized that NXT had stagnated. It was basically the same couple of guys in the main events over and over and over again. Ciampa, Gargano, Cole, Balor. Ciampa, Gargano, Cole, Balor. And just one mixture of the other. You know, Cross didn't really get over the way that they wanted him to. He was over, but he wasn't really that over. Not as much as they wanted him to. Keith Lee did get over, but the moment he really got over, the main roster snatched him up. And then they ruined that. So there's a lot of reasons why NXT peaked and wasn't really doing as well as it should have. But it doesn't matter. It occurred. It was time to change NXT to something different. And that, I think, was very important. And I'll die on that hill. You know, WWE is very smart that they realize you can't juice the same thing forever. You can bring it back. Like, you can bring back Hulk Hogan or Goldberg or Stone Cold Steve Austin, but it can never be that again for the long term. And eventually you have to move on. And it doesn't matter that we all think John Cena still has more in him. And John Cena is a bigger star now than he was before. They made the decision. John Cena is done. You know, John Cena is over. It's Roman's time now. Eventually they're going to make that decision that Roman's time is done. And it's going to be whoever comes next. And they have been doing a really good job of making those decisions. They don't always choose the successors correctly. You know, like Lex Luger or something like that. But they make the decision that it's time to go in a different direction. And you see other promotions, they never really do that. They hold on to the same style or the same thing over and over and over and over and over. And that having that consistency, it helps. But it's, you know, business is always adapt or die. And WWE does not have any problems adapting. And the killing off of the NXT Black and Gold is just a matter of them trying to adapt to a new landscape of AEW doing what they were doing better than they were doing it. Yes, the AEW was spending more money on independent talent, and they were working lighter schedules. They could choose their own names. They were actually paying for theme songs. They were paying, you know, regular songs to be played for these guys so they can go back and get their Ring of Honor theme if they wanted to. And they didn't have to start over. They didn't have to get retrained, which is something they're going to talk about later. This kind of stuff gave AEW more of an advantage. So WWE decided to go in the complete opposite other direction. We're not even going to worry about indie wrestlers anymore with their quote unquote bad habits. And we're not going to deal with their egos or anything like that. We're going to go to college athletes who might have a passion, might have been a fan of this. Let's do them instead of doing all these independent wrestlers who are going to just, flake on us and go over to AEW when their contract is over anyway. I think it was a very smart decision. Now, he continues on the NXT roster. He says, quote, people like Braun Breaker, he's been training for a year. Half the women, they've been there a year maybe. There's a lot that's just so fresh and new. People used to say the constant churn of NXT was a negative. The churn is what's great about it. The people here now, hopefully a year and a half from now, none of them are even in NXT anymore. And the ones that make it to will be on Raw and SmackDown. That's the magic. It truly is a developmental league. The college football, AAA baseball, yeah. They're not all quite ready to be in that major league role yet, but you're discovering them before they become household names. And he says, we were talking about this shift anyway. That's where we were headed. It happened at a period of time where I had to leave for a bit. Luckily, Shawn Michaels had been there doing it with me at the time, so it was a seamless thing. I stepped out, did what I needed to do, but that team has killed it. They really created a show where you can really say that the next generation of stars. All right, so he, of course, talks about the AEW wrestlers a little bit. He basically just has nice things to say about them. He doesn't really have anything negative to say about those guys, except for, it's okay for the business or whatever. So we're going to skip that. We're going to go down to him talking about indie wrestlers. Now, this, of course, got a lot of flack but Triple H's opinion on indie wrestlers has pretty much been the same. The WWE opinion of the indies has been the same for, 15 years, 16 years, maybe even longer. It's just been the same. But here's what The Athletic says. With some independent wrestlers, there would be, quote, bad habits to break, like footwork or promo work or camera stuff. Young and inexperienced college athletes are easier to mold. That is true. So Triple H says, quote, the tryouts we did before, where there were a lot of athletes and experienced indie guys, I don't think there's any less of a that's a rock star. The indie stuff, half of it is he's a good in-ring performer, but the rest is a mystery. He's got bad habits. I have to get him out of it. This is almost a cleaner. It's a blank slate. So he's admitting it. The independent guys were basically good wrestler, but what else? What else did you got? Where's your personality? Do you know where cameras are? You know how to work the cameras. You know how to do promos. Are you working in a safe way? All these different things that they're looking at, and they found that they have to retrain the independent guys over and over again. Now, the comment section to this very video asks that question numerous times. Why do they have to feel like they need to retrain people? And you need to realize, no matter, football players are retrained every time they go to a different team, because every team has different expectations for their quarterback, wide receiver, offensive lineman, etc. Different coaches, different schemes, different ideas, different expectations. That's how teams work. That's how business works. If you work for me, I want something done a specific kind of way. You might have to be retrained in order to do it. Maybe. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But, that's kind of the issue here, is that WWE wants things done a specific kind of way, and you work for them. So you're going to have to do things their way. That's why the people need to be retrained. So Triple H says, quote, the numbers force us to be more regimented. We used to be like, well, he's only been here a year. Let's give him more time. See if he picks it up. Now there's a 6-month coming in the door of adapt, get rolling, and then we're looking at your aptitude for this. We know in that 6 months, and some won't make it that long. That is the sword of Damocles. And this is the one thing that I really have a problem with out of this whole thing that Triple H is talking about, is he's saying, look, we're going to give people a couple of months. We're going to bring them in, but this is a paid training. So it's not like, the guys are paying and then getting cut. This is a paid training. You come in, you try out for WWE. They pay you for a little while. You see if the guy has any aptitude at all for the business. Is he listening, learning, playing along? Does he know what to do? If he does, he gets more time. If he doesn't, he gets cut. And that could be devastating, but at the same time, why waste anybody's time? Especially if they have such big draft classes, which they still kind of do. And then with the NIL program, they're probably going to have even bigger draft classes. So this makes sense to me, at least, even though I think it's a bit harsh. I think you need longer than 6 months. If you're completely changing industries, maybe you need longer than 6 months. Now, maybe some of these hard-headed indie wrestlers probably give them 6 months. But I think somebody who was a football player a year ago and, now he's in wrestling, you have to be like, okay, I think he needs a little bit longer than 6 months, But I'm thinking Triple H is looking at it from the perspective of if a guy is particularly bad, there's no point in waiting, and he has no ability to learn. There's no point in waiting. And I think that's a pretty good point. So he also spent some time talking about making new stars and, that, the times have changed and it takes time. So he says, quote, 3 years ago, The Tonight Show would call and want a guest and ask for Triple H or The Undertaker or John Cena. There was a year I couldn't make it work and I asked them to pick Roman or Braun Strowman. They weren't interested. Now Roman is on the show on his own. It takes time. You're building stars. It's not like a flash in the pan stars where this guy's hot in boxing today and 6 months later nobody remembers him. You're trying to build generational stars that last. It takes time. It's a slow and steady progression, and we're getting there. Becky Lynch, Roman, they're becoming household names. And I think every generation sort of has those guys where it takes a while for you to grow into them. The previous generation don't see them as being as popular or as big or as important. I mean, especially from the metrics that we use. I mean, how many times have you heard from some podcast or some YouTuber that, wrestling used to be so much more popular when he was a kid, And if you were in 1997 and you were gushing over Stone Cold Steve Austin, then some guy walks up to you and says, hey, Hogan and Andre, they sold 97,000 people in the Silverdome and they had a match on TV that, 20 million people saw. Austin is never going to touch that number. The Rock is never going to touch that number. It doesn't matter what you say or what you think. They aren't Hulk Hogan. And that is absolutely true. And John Cena will never be Stone Cold Steve Austin. He will never be The Rock. And Roman Reigns will never be John Cena. It's every generation is going to have their own stars and their own metrics because those metrics are going to change. You go from there being no cable, therefore broadcast TV is pretty much all you had. And so you got massive numbers on TV for like the territory era. You had hundreds of thousands and millions of people watching slow and steady wrestling in Missouri or something like that because they only had 3 channels, But then you have cable and there's 100 channels. So of course there's going to be fewer people watching. There's more options to watch TV. Then of course, once you add in things like DVR, cable, satellite, then you got streaming, all this kind of stuff. Yes, it's going to be different as far as the people who are going to be watching the shows. Then when you look at the attendance records, you're going to look at it and say, well, WWE was doing 60-something thousand. I think WrestleMania 17 did 60-something thousand. They did about that at WrestleMania 38, and people said that, the business is dead. It's like, I don't, I don't see where you get that from. It's like, when they can no longer reach those same numbers in terms of attendance for WrestleMania, sure, but they're exceeding that. They're doing 60,000 back to back on back to back nights. It's like, I don't know how you argue with success. And that's one of the things that I really kind of trip over. Is like, I don't have to like it to understand that the metric of success is different. And the metrics of success for the business now are different. I saw a boxing reporter talk about attendance not mattering in boxing anymore. It's all about sponsorships. And I didn't understand what that meant. I was kind of like, Are you telling me that boxers don't care if there's an empty arena? And then I realized, a lot of people made a lot of money during the pandemic. UFC, WWE, there was even some boxing fights that took place in front of no people, and those fights made money. And you realize that, hey, shit, she might have a point here. They're looking at other streams of income, other ways of, creating income. And you say to yourself, okay, now that's one thing. Then you see, all right, they're utilizing YouTube, they're utilizing Twitter, they're utilizing, Instagram. Pretty much everyone's doing that. There's people who have never had a television show that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars because their kid does unboxing videos on YouTube. And you're saying to yourself, okay, I see now. The business has changed. Business of television and streaming and video has changed. And it has to be respected. So a lot of these old fogies who talk about what Showbuzz Daily says, like, that's an important barometer of looking at television ratings. Of course, that's sure, but the TV is only one thing out of 50 things now. We have to look at all the different tentacles to this octopus to really understand whether the business is in a good place or not. And I really don't care to do that because I really don't care about that much of this kind of stuff. I just know wrestling has always been there and probably always will be. And that's just kind of all I really need to know. But it's interesting if I can find out, hey, WrestleMania did better on social media than the Super Bowl. Like, hey, that's great. Does it make WrestleMania better? Not really. It just means that more people was talking about it, which is a good thing. That means more people is watching it. But they don't mean that they're going to sit down and watch all 3 hours of Monday Night Raw or dedicate 12 hours a week to watching wrestling. Wrestling fans do that. I'm not going to expect average Joe Jane who works in an office to dedicate 12 hours of their day to watching wrestling across the 4 days a week that it's on TV. That's just ridiculous. And I think people need to understand that that's not the case anymore. When during the Monday Night Wars, there were literally 5 hours of wrestling. There was 2 hours of Raw, 3 hours of Nitro. That was it, usually for the fucking week. That was usually it for the week. People didn't watch Velocity or, Sunday Night Heat and that kind of shit. That's why that stuff ended up being just B-show stuff. It may have started out as A-show material, but it ended up being B-show stuff because nobody really cared about it. And we need to recognize that now. So, that all being said, it's now time to go into NXT. Man, I told y'all we was going to be here for a while. All right, so that was 30 minutes on just Triple H interview. I probably should do that separate. I probably should post that separate, but we'll see. All right, so NXT. NXT starts with Pretty Deadly. They open the show. They talk about how they dominated NXT UK and now how they beat 4 teams in one night. Grizzly Young veterans come out there and say, where was our invite? That they would have dismantled these meatbags. And that the success Pretty Deadly had in the UK was because they left. Which was unironically true. Pretty Deadly did become pretty much stars in NXT UK after Grizzly Young veterans left. And they're only the tag team champions now because the Grizzly Young veterans have allowed it and they were not invited to the gauntlet. Grizzly Young veterans was then attacked by Legado del Fantasma. Setting up the Legado del Fantasma Grizzly Young veterans match would happen later. So Legado del Fantasma win the match. It was a really fun match. This is now the time to talk about some other news that we didn't really discuss in the Triple H interview, such as Raul Mendoza's name is now Cruz del Toro. I don't know what Cruz means, but I think Del Toro means the bull, something the bull. Look, he's really good. He showed his ass in this match. He really stood out. Raul Mendoza has been a guy who's been in NXT for a long time. He's been there a long time. And he hasn't really been given much. This is the most he's ever been given with Legado del Fantasma. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't really, he doesn't have anything to say. But when he's allowed to just go in there and work, he's killer. He's really good. And, he really showed his ass in this particular match. The Grizzly Young veterans are almost always good too. So this was fine. Pretty Deadly ran into Indy and Persia Parada. They were yes boying and yes girling, and they were dressed absolutely awfully. I don't know which one of them had like a halter top on, but the crisscross thing on his stomach, it was absolutely disgusting. It's so obnoxious, man. Like, they're super obnoxious. Anyway, they thought they were being challenged to a match by Indy Hartwell and Persia Pirotta, so as they were talking, they accepted the challenge. Only to find out that they were really being challenged by Duke Hudson and Dexter Lumis. So that is our main event of the evening, even though it probably shouldn't have been. So the match is set up, and Indy Hartwell wants Duke Hudson to wear pants. So she needs to know his pant size in. And Duke Hudson is like, no, I'm not wearing pants. That doesn't matter. I need to be able to communicate with my partner. And Dexter Lumis doesn't speak. He also doesn't change his facial expressions. And as Duke Hudson is talking to him, Indy Hartwell is responding. She's telling him, oh yeah, Dexter likes that. Dexter doesn't like that. He's like, how do you know? He's not saying anything. He's not doing anything. And she's like, hey, you gotta chill out. And so Dexter just stares. Therefore, Duke stares at him. And they have this stare off. And then Indy says, look, you have to learn how to communicate. So they're trying to be funny. Duke Hudson thought this was all stupid, of course. And it is. A lot of it is stupid. Pretty Deadly then went on to defeat Dexter Lumis and Duke Hudson in a solid match. It was a solid match for the tag team championships. Duke Hudson was over with this crowd, and I don't understand why. He didn't do anything. He just kind of existed in this match, whatever. I don't know how I feel about Duke and Persia Pirotta being baby faces. Like, that's really odd. And to give them a tag team title match in their very first tag team match was also a wicked decision. A pretty brutal decision, honestly. I'm guessing it's just because, I thought it was because they were going to break up immediately afterwards. Therefore, you had to go ahead and get it out of the way. But they didn't break them up, at least not yet. Maybe they'll break them up next week. All right, so Brian Breaker, he had a hell of a night. Brian Breaker had one hell of a night. He came out after Pretty Deadly got challenged by the Grizzly Young Veterans. He jumped the barricade and called out Joe Gacy because he wants his dad's Hall of Fame ring back. Joe Gacy said, well, if you want the ring, you got to come find me, but I ain't hard to find. And then he starts doing the laughing gimmick, the same one that Bailey did, the same one that the same one Seth Rollins does, and his face is all over the screens, and there's weird lighting, and I'm like, oh Lord, we got ourselves another computer genius who knows how to work the magic of the computer magics. I was like, oh boy. So Brian is now floating around backstage. He bumps into the Grizzly Young Veterans. He's about ready to tear them apart. He ignores those two goobers, and he finds the cage of the recording from 2 weeks ago where his dad had been kidnapped and held in this cage. He then slams that because, hey, why not? Why not break shit while you're at it? It's not yours anyway. Go ahead and break the shit. Who cares? Later, Brian goes and continues to wander around backstage, and he eventually finds a room that has like mirrors in it. And he looks in the mirror. It's like a creepy room with a creepy door. Newsflash, if you're ever in a situation that's kind of like a horror situation, don't go into any creepy rooms. Don't go behind any creepy doors. Just don't do it. But Brian is a man. He's such a man. So he opened the door, and there's weird mirrors in there. And there's a weird mirror that has Joe Gacy's face on it. And Brian is reaching for the weird mirror, and only for Joe Gacy and he spins around and Joe Gacy is gone. And he's like, ah! And he breaks the window. So after the main event of the show, Joe Gacy appears on the balcony. He has the Hall of Fame ring, which should have been welded to his hand. Remember, he pulled this Hall of Fame ring out of the fire and put it on his hand. And his hand is not only not burned, but it is also not welded to his hand. Come on. In any event, as Gacy comes out, Brian marches to the ring. He climbs through the crowd up to the balcony. Joe Gacy says, look, I'll give you the ring back, no shenanigans. But you have to give me a title match. Braun Breaker agrees. Gacy gives him the ring and says, you have to do one more thing for me. Have to take a leap of faith. Then he baby pushes him. Not even a full shove, just a baby push. And then the camera stays on Gacy because we're not allowed to watch Braun Breaker fall. So apparently he must have just, I don't know, climbed down. I don't know what he did. We didn't see the or nothing. It was just the camera was on Gacy, and then the camera cut down, and Gacy and Braun Breaker was on the ground like my back, my neck, and my back, my kidneys, my spine, and then he got mauled by a gang of druids. So not only does Joe Gacy have complete control over all the cameras in the building, which is not within the skill set of Joe Gacy, to my understanding. I don't know if Joe Gacy has that kind of power. But he controls the lights. He controls the security cameras. He has a creepy room with weird mirrors. He also can withstand having his hand burned with a ring. He also committed almost murder. And he's got druids. Like, Joe Gacy over the course of 2 weeks has become the most powerful man in NXT history. I don't see how he went from guy who was barely on TV to now being the most powerful man in NXT. It's so bizarre. It's such a bizarre thing when you start adding magic and shit to it. It just makes things so weird. Harland is not present for any of this stuff, which would have made perfect sense for Harland to maybe mangle Braun Breaker during one of these segments. But I think Harland is gone because he's getting married. I think that's what's going on. I think he's getting married, so he's kind of like not going to be around for a while. Very odd timing to get married, like right in the middle of your buddy's big push, where you're probably going to be needed. So look, outside of the funhouse mirrors, that I hated that, and I didn't like the whole Druids thing or the weak shove off the balcony. I didn't like any of that stuff. But the idea of Braun Breaker marching through the building looking for Joe Gacy, who stole his dad's Hall of Fame ring, that's perfect. That makes perfect sense. It's only when you add all the hootenanny on top of it that I just kind of like, come on, brother. Like, he couldn't. Joe Gacy had like a lariat finish. Like, and all of a sudden he's in the security room like the Riddler. I don't know, man. And plus, I think like comic book villains are really making a real damage to the wrestling business. Like, everybody is now like cackling comic book villain like a Skeletor or something like that. It's not really necessary, but that's just kind of how the business is going now. And I don't hate it. I just don't care that much for it. All right. Tiffany Stratton defeated Saray. Tiffany Stratton did cheat. This match was actually kind of fun. Saray was dominant for most of the match, as usual, because she's the babyface. But Tiffany Stratton with an illegal headbutt, followed by her twisting Vader bomb for the finish. Tiffany Stratton is growing there. She's getting there. I know a lot of people are mad that Saray lost again. She's beat Tiffany Stratton, or she's lost to Tiffany Stratton twice now. I don't see why she lost this time. I'm just going to be honest. I don't see why she lost this match. Maybe there's a plan for Tiffany Stratton. Maybe there's a plan for Saray, but Saray's supposed to be like a superhero now, a magical girl. She should be able to withstand a headbutt, even though it was a kind of a cheap shot headbutt. But I'm guessing this is not over. So we'll see. So there was a video of Carmelo Hayes saying he wasn't pressed about losing the title. He's not the kind of guy who needs a title. He's the kind of guy a title needs. I think that's a great line. So Santos Escobar was watching this video and kind of scoffed and said that Carmelo Hayes makes a lot of excuses and that he was never worthy of the North American title, while a guy like him is infinitely worthy of the North American title, and that he's going to remind Carmelo Hayes of his place in the North American title scene, and it's the back of the line. Then we got a live, I don't know if it was a live promo, but it was a kind of a backstage promo between Carmelo Hayes and Trick Williams, who says that Santos Escobar is indeed in a league of his own, but I created the line. I am the line. And that Santos Escobar is going to be the first casualty of the Getting Back the Gold tour. All right. This led us to the match. immediately after Legado del Fantasma and the Grizzled Young Veterans, we got Santos Escobar versus Carmelo Hayes. And then a match that was actually very, very, very good. This match was pretty good. It was back and forth, equally paced match. Santos Escobar had been talking some trash about Tony D'Angelo earlier in the night. So Tony D'Angelo sent some goons. Well, I shouldn't blame Tony, but I'm gonna blame Tony because two paisans. I said last week, like, who's gonna be his paisans? Apparently, there's gonna be random guys. Suited guys blasted Santos Escobar in the knee with a crowbar, threw him back in the ring, top rope leg drop. Santos Escobar loses to Carmelo Hayes. He's kind of out of the picture for being North American champion. That sucks. I love Santos Escobar. I love this match, but it was all about making sure that Carmelo Hayes kind of gets his win back after taking an L. So now we have two branches. Let's go with the Tony D'Angelo branch. All right. So Tony D'Angelo, of course, denies the attack on Santos Escobar and says that it was probably a couple of Goombas that was trying to make a name for themselves. Then he says that he likes the Legado del Fantasma truck. It's a nice truck, man. I don't know that much about cars, but I know that joint is nice. It's kind of pretty. Anyway, Santos Escobar is pretty upset following his loss, and he's going back to his truck. And he finds out there's a boot on it. Somebody put a boot on his truck. And he's like, no, what's going on here, man? And then he finds a dead fish wrapped in newspaper on the hood of the car. Now, he knows what's going on. It's Tony D'Angelo. And I'm surprised he didn't just shake his fist like, D'Angelo! You rotten scoundrel, you. This has been Legado del Fantasma working babyface the whole evening. So that's been good. I really enjoyed those guys working babyface. The crowd loves these dudes. It's the right decision just to give the crowd the guys that they like as babyfaces. So since they like Santos Escobar as a babyface, they like Legado del Fantasma, makes them the babyfaces in this. I like it. I like it. It's okay. Now, the other path that we could take out of that match is Trick and Mello. Immediately after the match, Trick and Mello says that nobody is standing in their way because they took out Solo Sikoa last week and they took out Santos Escobar this week. So now it's time for Grimes. So now they're going to beat up Spring Breaking. They're going to beat up Cameron Grimes to take the North American title back. Grimes comes out to a muted reaction. The crowd is not wild for Cameron Grimes anymore. That's uncomfortable. Anyway, Grimes says that he wasn't man enough to face him last week and make a challenge, so now he's going to do it now. And he accepted the challenge. Then Solo Sikoa came out of nowhere, super kicked Trick Williams, and will be wrestling him next week, and then attacked Carmelo Hayes. The crowd is hot for Solo Sikoa, who gets in Cameron Grimes' face and says that he got next. And somehow this has become a triple threat match in which Trick, Cameron Grimes, and Solo Sikoa will wrestle each other. Not Trick, but Mello, Cameron Grimes, and Solo Sikoa will be wrestling each other for the title at Spring Breaking. And I really would have rather they just had an eliminator and just had Carmelo Hayes beat Solo Sikoa, because Solo Sikoa is not winning that match. Now maybe they're going to do some kind of gimmick where Solo Sikoa is going to take the pin, so Carmelo Hayes doesn't have to take the pin, so that feud can continue. And maybe that's what they'll do. But Solo Sikoa being super over with this audience, even though he can't really cut great promos and he really hasn't done much of anything. I think that's all just bloodline shit. He's over because he's brother of the Usos, and that's kind of it. It's not bad. Not a bad reason to be over, I guess. But it doesn't really help you in the long term because it's like, okay, well, who cares? All right, so now we get into the realm of the weird. Grayson Waller is cutting a promo on Sanga and said he fired him because he had this perfect plan to become a champion, and that dead weight was bringing him down. Then Andre Chase comes out of nowhere and says, "This is a teachable moment." And then starts to say words to Grayson Waller, who does not care about his words. And then Sanga appears and tries to murder Grayson Waller. Grayson Waller then flees and continues to flee until he gets into the ring. Now, Sanga follows him into the ring, and a referee just slides into the ring like, screw it, we're about to start this match right now. And then they have the match. Sanga versus Grayson Waller. And Grayson Waller wins the match clean. What a weird decision. A weird decision for Grayson Waller to win this match clean. Of course, Sanga losing is also very weird. This was much too soon for them to be broken up. It was much too soon. I can only guess that this decision was made for some type of alternative reason. I'm just thinking there's some kind of alternative reason here to why this decision was made. And maybe Sanga is going to get cut soon. I don't know. But it seems like they really hadn't got started. And a lot of this stuff on this show feels rushed. That's my number one critique to this show this week, is that a lot of stuff felt rushed. The Grizzly Young Veterans immediately come in and start challenging for the tag team titles. They lose immediately. Get them out of the picture. Same thing with Santos Escobar. The feud with him and Tony D'Angelo is being kind of fast-tracked. Gacy and Braun fast-tracked. The breakup of Sanga and Grayson Waller seemed fast. Everything seemed like it was going too fast. Like this was a packed show. They got a lot done. But it still felt like they were doing too much. Okay, we could have saved some of this stuff. Like, what the fuck are they going to do next week? I remember I basically talked to my brother. I was like, man, is this show about to get canceled? And I don't know nothing about it. Like, there's 9 matches on this show or something like that. There's like 40 fucking segments. Like, it's a lot of stuff happening on this show. And there was a debut. Like, wow, there's just so much shit going on. Anyway, Cora Jade had a promo where she basically says never meet your idols, rather. And that she met the real Natalya in NXT. And that she was dead wrong about Natalya. And that Natalya is dead wrong about her. That the future isn't bleak. Her future is very bright. And that she once started Natalya as a dream match. And now she dreams of kicking her legendary ass. I don't know. They're pushing hard for this Natalya as a legend stuff. They're pushing very, very hard for it. I'm not exactly a fan of that. Natty is a legend shit. Maybe we can bottle that for a moment. Let's put a bottle on that. All right. Natalya defeated Tatum Paxley. The match was not a complete squash, as you would expect. And Tatum Paxley actually showed some pretty interesting offense here. I didn't mind her performance. I thought she was pretty good, actually. Somebody gave Natalya a hat, and she started to mock Cora Jade with the hat. Auntie Natty is so weird. Oh, she's so weird. Ooh, she's weird. She's like that 30-year-old lady hanging around in the college. She just seems like she's perpetually horny. I don't know why. Maybe it's the boobs. Maybe it's the boobs being up so high on her chest, sticking out so far. And I'm thinking, like, is TJ not doing it right? Like, what's going on, TJ? Did that neck injury, I shouldn't say that. I take that back. Draw a line through it, edit that out. We're going to edit that out. Okay. Now, Natalya later, she says that Cora Jade loves playing the victim, and that she's, last week was self-defense. That all of these women, when they come out of NXT, they almost immediately come and start bothering her. Which is hilarious because that's exactly what happened with Aaliyah and Xia Li. They both came fresh out of NXT and started bothering Natalya. So she's saying that instead of waiting for Cora Jade to come and bother her, she decided to come down there and show these girls a thing or two. She was then, she was then confronted by Nikita Lyons, and I had no idea Nikita Lyons was so big. My God, man. She is a mountain of a lady. She's Mountain Lady. She's the Paul Gattez. She's huge, bruh. So she got in Natalya's face and said that she saw last week that Natalya was calling everybody out, putting everybody on notice. And she said, well, I noticed. And Natalya said something about the sharpshooter. I don't care what Natalya has to say. when Nikita Lyons is on the screen. You feel me? Natalia's words are just womp 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 womp. She's like an adult from Charlie Brown. Nikita Lyons then says that she don't have to worry about the sharpshooter because she's flexible. And I was like, well, we already know this. I've seen some of the pictures of her stretching and everything. I've seen that. But, Natalia seemed like, oh. Okay. All right. Now, I'm not a fan of this whole Nikita Lyons, Lash Legend rematch that they setting us up for. But, they've stretched that building once. I guess they can stretch it again, There's still creases in that bitch from the last time they went out there and did what they do. When they do, they do. Anyway, Natalia's run in NXT is a thing. It's occurring, and I'm okay with it. I don't hate it. Don't dislike it. I'm all right with it. All right, so we got a debut. So they did a vignette for a little gamer girl who was playing WWE video games as she was growing up. And oddly enough, for some reason, I think she was playing like WrestleMania 2000 in a John Cena shirt. Like it's like, I don't know if maybe I was wrong in that, but it seemed like that's kind of how it was. Like she wouldn't have been playing that game because she wouldn't have been born yet. This girl was like 19, right? So she wouldn't have been born when WrestleMania 2000 came out. Anyway, we find out that it's Roxy, aka Roxanne Perez. And she was supposed to make her debut next week on NXT. But as she was talking backstage about how nervous she was and how surreal it is that she's going to be debuting next week, she got into a war of words with JC Jane of Toxic Attraction, who challenged her to a match. And they have the match. And JC Jane of Toxic Attraction, who is my favorite member of Toxic Attraction, by the way, she's less awkward than the other one, the orange-haired one, whose name is escaping me at the moment. I was about to call her Tampon Girl. Gigi Dolan. She's less awkward than Gigi Dolan, but she's not as natural in the role as Mandy Rose. Like this just feels like a Mandy Rose gimmick. But JC Jane plays like the perfect balance of the two, where she seems to understand the gimmick a lot more. So I'm not looking at it in terms of sexiness. I'm looking at it in terms of, I think she has a brighter future, because it seems like Gigi is forcing a lot of this stuff that she's doing. It doesn't come across as being very natural to her. So anyway, Roxanne Perez wins the match with a distraction roll up after Wendy Chu tore up Toxic Attraction's locker room and did so by ripping up all of their stuff and flipping over some chairs. So that distracted them, and it was a roll up. And I was like, we definitely could have saved this for next week. We're doing too much. We didn't need this week. It wasn't really necessary. It's not like the show needed Roxy to be there. We could have waited. We could have waited. We could have told her story a little bit more. There has to be more to her story than she played video games, and that made her want to be a wrestler. There got to be more to it than that. And please, can we stop with the fangirling and the fanboying? Let's literally do something else. They should have utilized Booker T. Like, I never really wanted to know what I wanted to do with my life until I met Booker T. And he asked me to train at his school and yada, yada, yada. And then says like, maybe WWE could be something I could do one day. Something like that. Instead of, I was a huge fan and I had all the posters and the trading cards and everything when I was just a youngin'. And they're like, oh God, nobody can, some people can, relate to that stuff. I know I can. I grew up with a lot of that shit. But I don't really want my fans in the ring. Just not a fan of fans being in the ring, Anyway, I went to the bathroom, came back. Wesley was on the screen. I was like, what is this guy talking about? And he started getting into a war of words with Zion Quinn. And Wesley is saying that maybe beating up on Zion Quinn is going to find him some peace in the chaos of his life. He's had a rough couple of weeks since being stripped of the tag team titles and losing his tag team partner. Zion Quinn's new gimmick is Guy who tries to give you life advice, but you ain't trying to hear it. And you don't really like him or know him like that, so he probably should mind his own business. Like, his gimmick is that he's a meddler. Like, this guy's a big dude. Like, why is his gimmick he's trying to give people life advice? Why is that his gimmick? Come on, Sean. You know, what did this guy do to you? Anyway, Zion Quinn decimates Wesley. Wesley is still using the MSK theme song and the colors and everything. Zion Quinn worked big in this match. You know, he no-sold some of Wesley's offense, and when he hit him with that finish, it felt and looked like a real finish. Go Quinn. That shit rules. We didn't need this match either on this show. We could have set it up for next week, but it's there. What else we got here? So we got Roderick Strong and Malcolm Bivens. I think, if I remember correctly, they sent Ivy Nile to NXT UK for a stint. And she seems to not be a big fan of it from the phone call with Malcolm Bivens. Afterwards, Roderick Strong says he refuses to watch another group crumble under his watch. He is the leader of Diamond Mine, and anybody who disagrees with him and his vision is an enemy of Diamond Mine. That is essentially the stake through the chest of Diamond Mine, because we already know now Roderick Strong is about to get kicked out, and Bivens is going to take over, and it's going to be Bivens, Ivy Nile, and the Creeds. It's too soon to break up Diamond Mine. It's too soon. I get it that Roderick Strong has kind of run his course in NXT. I get that. I understand that. Please believe I get it. But come on, man. Literally. Let's not do this. Let's not break up Diamond Mine so soon. Let's do something else with them. You know, let's not do that. All right, so let's move on. Nathan Fraser got another vignette. That was interesting. He talked about living above the ropes and his creativity and doing high flying stuff. It didn't make him sound too interesting. They did a catch up with Akemen Jiro, who apparently was injured when he fell on people because Von Wagner threw him into the crowd. So apparently he fell on a stack of people and injured himself. Von Wagner was then suspended for throwing him into a stack of people, and that was an odd decision. Kushida once again is gone from NXT, so Ikemen Jiro is probably off TV as they repackage his character and kill off Jacket Time. Kushida had a decent run in NXT. I knew that it was over for him when he started going on a losing streak during the pandemic. He had barely started on the show and he was already losing matches, like match after match after match. His run as Cruiserweight champion was fun. I didn't hate that. But I felt like he was in the same position in NXT that he was in New Japan, is why he left in the first place. And maybe he just never got comfortable in the United States. And so it was kind of like, you know, it was a distraction being in the United States. But Jacket Time was fun when it lasted. I didn't hate Kushida's. I didn't think he had a terrible run. I think he had some really good matches, but that was pretty much it. He was just a match guy. He didn't really have much in the way of showing a personality until he started hanging out with Jiro. And then that was short-lived. So Jiro is still there. That ought to be interesting to see what they do with him. But no Kushida, no Jacket Time. That sucks. But Kushida is not going to be going to AEW from what I heard. I heard he's going to go back to New Japan, which is probably going to be the best for him. And maybe New Japan could actually use him now. Maybe they actually appreciate him. Who knows? But that is NXT for April the 19th, 2022. A rushed show that I felt like they tried to explain too much. They tried to put too much into the show. And the show felt bloated and clustered and busy. Like, it's good for the show to feel busy. It's moving at a nice clip. But it also felt like everything was stepping on something else. There was a bunch of matches with no entrances. Like, the main event had nobody got an entrance. Like there is some time where you have to let things breathe. We want to know who these people are. Tell us where Pretty Deadly is from. Make up something that's modelistic. They're from Vero Beach, Florida, or they're from the French Alps or something like that, to add something to the characters. Tell me how much they weigh. I want to hear their theme song, see their fucking entrance. It's like the tag team champions, they don't get a fucking entrance. Like, come on, man. I don't know what's going on, but the lack of entrances, the cluttered nature of this show where everything feels smashed together, that's a problem. But otherwise, it's a very fun show. It's still got all of the cast of characters, and it's silly and over the top, as NXT supposed to be nowadays. But there's just, that's the one thing that I would have a problem with, is I think the pacing was off this week, and it was just too much. They tried to put too much into this one show. But let me know what you guys think. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.